friends. My name is Brittney. I'm the founder of Conscious Pathways Education Consulting.
Hey guys, Kylie Elizabeth here, also known as the Virtuoso Educator, and I'm the founder and CEO of the Virtuoso Education Consulting Services. And Brittney and I are excited to share that we are 3 days away. We're starting our countdown clock for our upcoming summit series, Uplifted Education, and we hope that you guys all can join us. So today we just want to share a little bit about what to expect out of our summit and the guests that we will have on board, and just kind of give some insights on why we really wanted to have this education summit for our educators this summer. So Brittney, I know you're starting us off with the first half of the summit, so just give us some insights of what to expect and, you know, some reasonings behind the options that you gave for our summit this summer.
Yes. So this summer, I think we really wanted to lean into kind of refreshing education, uplifting education. We talk a lot about what's wrong in education, and granted, there's a lot of things that are wrong and do need to be fixed. But we also wanted to lean into who's out there doing things that are right, who's out there uplifting education and bringing light into it. So our first, couple of sessions are going to be focused on play, joy, freedom, liberation, looking at really important topics like literacy and how do we make these things still fun and enjoyable for us as educators, for students, for people who are in and around education. How do we still make this an experience that is enjoyable and worthwhile and ignites our sense of curiosity and passion in education. Our first session will be with Dr. Denisha Jones. She's the Executive Director of Defending the Earlier Years, and she'll be talking about play as a tool for liberation. And so how can we incorporate more play into our lessons, into our daily classroom practices? How can we make education fun and enjoyable in a place where we all want to be? This will really enhance our classroom practices. This will really enhance the way that we as educators feel about education. It'll even be good for administrators and leaders to really look at how are we igniting fun and curiosity and passion into our school community at large.
So with our very first one, I thought it was interesting when we were talking about our podcast, not podcast, we both podcast, but when we were talking about our summit series, this is new for both of us. We, like you said, mentioned, we always talk about the negative things that are happening, and which are not least important, but we really wanted to uplift education and really remind people that there is importance of education, as we all know, but there is also a need for the love of learning and the joy of learning. And I think that gets stripped down a lot in our education systems, because of some of the constructs that we have, or just how the system is in education. And it's not necessarily fun for all students or parents or even teachers. And so I really love that we're taking this opportunity to connect back with our, fundamental reasons of why we love education, and, really kind of doing that storytelling, and for our special guests to really be able to share with us their experiences and expertise, so then our teachers that are listening and on board and who, heavily affect our students can take these words of wisdom and kind of, revamp their outlook on education in more of a positive way. It is clear, and we want to be clear, that this isn't only for teachers or educators, that we would love for everybody to come listen into the conversations, because if you're a homeschooler, if you are, in public or private, all of this can apply. And these skills are, generally geared for all of us. But again, if you are a teacher in public education and need ways and strategies to work and connect with your students, this is going to be a great summit for you to listen into. And so after, with our first session, Joyful Learning and fostering the power of play. So what is our next one? So we have the Freedom Dreaming. So explain session 2 for Freedom Dreaming.
Yeah, so session 2 will be on July 6th, 2024, and that'll be joined by Dr. Tinette Powell from the Children's Equity Project. And this really brings in this idea of liberation, and really, how are we imagining the future of education? How are we imagining where we are right now? It also looks and honors and recognizes the resilience of communities to how we've got so far, given everything that we've been through, right? And so really honoring our background, honoring that resilience, honoring our, current needs for dreaming and rest. These are things that our ancestors often didn't have the ability to do. And so, just honoring that we have that now. And so how are we dreaming for that future? How are we kind of breaking that status quo? How are we, envisioning kind of like just breaking those chains that we're in now and then continuing to make education be the most powerful thing that we know that it can be.
Mm-hmm.
And Dr. Tunette Powell is just so beautiful. She just has a way of storytelling, and really bringing in her own experience, bringing in the experience of others around her, and really exploring this idea of freedom dreaming. I know my conversations with her have always been so incredibly enlightening. So I am so excited to just bring her background, her experience, her stories to this stage, essentially, to
Yeah.
share and to really help us all to start freedom dreaming and looking at education now, looking at where we want it to be, looking at, how can we get there? Even our little steps, make progress, right? So
Right.
I think that one's going to be super exciting.
It is. And, just not to forget, so today is Juneteenth, so June 19,
Yes,
2024.
yes.
And, on the backside, we are 159 years post-emancipation. And so it's really interesting how we still have these conversations on freedom. And, we're still working with what we deal with within the society, especially here in the United States. And I think, too, that this is also a really great session to have, because again, we have to remember a lot of our ancestors in the Black community and in other enslaved communities couldn't read. It was a privilege to read. They couldn't write. And so just really acknowledging kind of where we came from and what those before us have done for us to be able to do freedom dreaming just in today's day and age, to think of what that means to dream and actually live out our realities and have the privilege to do so. So I think this is such a really important session as well, which also ties into your next session of the literacy liberation. Again, we're in a literacy crisis. This is what me and you have really talked about too in our podcast together, is
Yeah.
on a national level, we're seeing very low reading skills, reading capabilities, even for our adults in our society, and how important it really is to know that having foundational literacy skills is very liberating, in a sense of you're not held back because you can't read certain things. If it's fundamental reading all the way to contracts, if you're buying a house, if you're getting a business, like you have to understand the language of what we're working on. So your next session on July 20th of literacy liberation, explain a little bit more about that and what our viewers can expect to get from that session.
Absolutely. You explained, you introduced it so well. We are dealing with the literacy crisis here in the US, and from many, many, many conversations I've had with educators, with people in teacher preparation programs, with people who are actually studying the best way to learn reading, from what I've learned, there isn't a really uniform way that we're doing that. And that's kind of the most wild thing to me. It makes sense why we're having a literacy crisis, right? And so we know the data. We know that if children aren't, proficient in reading around a third grade, that they're going to continue to be behind and they're going to have a really hard time catching up, right? And so we know that reading in the early years is so important, but how are we doing that? How are we doing that in a way that makes sense for their development, how their brains work and how their brains learn? How are we doing this in a way that is data driven and science backed? How are we doing this in a way that also doesn't hinder their love for learning, right? We don't want to just drill, 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 and then kids learn to hate reading, which isn't going to help them want
Right.
to do it more later in the future, right?
Mm-hmm.
So for our session on reading and literacy, I am joined by Clarice Jackson. She is the founder of Literacy Matters, and she does a Black Literacy Conference in Nebraska every year. And so she has a really big background in dyslexia, in literacy advocacy, in really working with Black educators to really uplift this education on dyslexia. And so she'll be coming in and talking to us a little bit more about the science of reading, about, the data that we see, about the students who are most impacted by illiteracy and even, illiteracy. So it's going to be really exciting, especially for educators, whether you're in early childhood or you're, teaching middle school, high school, or you're teaching teacher preparation programs, you're in higher education. I think this is going to be a really great session for you to join and see how what the current data is telling us, what the current science is telling us and what the best practices are in reading and literacy in education right now.
Mhm.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes, and I think again too, so many people, we this is what we talked about. We always talk about what is going on and what's wrong in our systems, and I love that again that we're putting on the backside of this is having resources and strategies that we can also use to implement inside our classrooms or our home classrooms, working with ourselves and with our students. But it's really, again, really important. So I'm super excited for your half, the first half that you're leading with us, and
Yes.
to kind of move into what we're doing in the second half. So again, Brittney took over the first sessions in having that joy and again that love for education and what that looks like. And so the other side of what we wanted to focus on too was the cultural responsive side in education, and why it's really important for us to really focus on collaboration and building communities in schools. So our part 2 is our building communities in schools, and on session 4, which happens in August 3rd, it's called Empowering Diverse Learners and Strategies for Cultural Relevant Education. So I'll be joined, we will be joined by Dr. Blaché, Renisha Blaché here in Arizona, and then Dr. Erica Dallas, who both of them are both educators. And Dr. Blaché, she is kind of all over the place, but she really focuses on amplifying the global African diaspora and voices within the diaspora and how that connects to us in our cultural relevancy in our education. And so she does a lot of holistic approaches through education. She calls it ecotistical, so looking at the ecosystems of our education and how that impacts us in schools versus as well in our communities. And then Dr. Dallas, who is an early childhood educator of over 15 years, she's the founder and CEO of Culturally Connected Consulting, LLC, and she does focus as well on cultural responsiveness and sustaining pedagogical practices. And so I'm really excited because that's like my, in this first session here, or part 4 is really exciting for me because this is what I focus on. I focus on the importance of understanding our communities that we live in and understanding our neighbors, understanding our students. And it's really important as an educator to be able to see the whole ecosystem as a whole, but then narrowing that down to the child and what approaches can we take with each individual student, which some, think it's hard, especially if you're in a class of 32, how do you focus on each student individually? But when we can look at this as a holistic ecological approach and maybe a little bit simpler to view. So I'm really excited about that. And Brittney, like you touch on this too through the work that you do as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the initial planning of this summit and when we were coming together and brainstorming about what information, did we think educators really wanted to have and what, topics did educators really want us to dive into, this was a topic that just kept coming up and kept coming up. Mm-hmm. And, we wanted to make sure that it was something that was integrated into every session that we did, that we were always kind of coming back to the roots of culturally, relevant, sustaining pedagogies and how are we doing that in the classroom and how all of our practices kind of weave together to create, like you said, this holistic image of, the student or the child that we're working with. And so I'm super excited about all of these sessions, but, really having a session that dives in a little bit deeper on culturally relevant, sustaining pedagogies and how does that look in the classroom? What are those practices? It can be really daunting, especially when you start learning more information. And as you said, thinking about you have, 30 plus students in your classroom. How am I supposed to know, the cultural backgrounds of each and every one of them? How am I supposed to do that in the classroom? And you don't have to stress yourself out doing it. We promise there are practices that are super easeful, things that you might already be doing in the classroom that you can just lean more into. And so I think that that's going to be something that we are really excited about.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, super excited about that session. And so then leading into our next session, which happens on August 17th, our session 5, again, one near and dear, because this is really the reason that I got into education in the first place, is the parent engagement. So elevating education through active parent engagement and involvement. And on that session, we're going to have a powerhouse, Miss Ramitha Gilmore, who goes by Mrs. Educator. She's coming to us from Florida. And Ramitha was a former educator, but now she focuses more on being an author and sharing light on the school to prison pipeline, as well as really talking about the importance of parent involvement and engagement in our children's activities and school, as well as she also has her own women's and girls groups to be a mentor to young girls, kind of taking the approach of something she didn't have when she was younger and kind of flip that. So I think too, within our communities, you know, and we talk about technology a lot, but technology really kind of is taking place of that mentorship or that in-person connection, you know, since post-COVID. And even through parenting, you know, I heard a new trend today, not today, the other day, is like, oh, you're a virtual parent. And I was like, oh, like that's a new coin term. Like, and I didn't share this with you either, but it's like there are parents that just talk to their kids. You know, if you're not in the home, well, that's one thing, but all texting through I caught myself texting my daughter because I feel like getting out of my bed across the house to see if she's up. You know what I mean? So it's like, what do we do? And that's just surface level, but just kind of think on a grand scheme of how are we showing up for our kids when it comes to education? How are we building connections with the educators that our children spend 18,720 hours with from K through 12th grade if you are in public school. And so that's a statistic, but you got to think of how important it is for us to have strong relationships with the schools, and really being there for our students K through higher education, not just when they're little, like because they're cute and we want to go to their little plays. Like we need very deep and very connected conversations with parents and teachers and our students, and very high expectations. I'm sorry, I won't go long into this one, but obviously this is like a very big passion of mine. And I'm super excited as a parent myself to be able to have these conversations. So this definitely is one for the parents too, if you are not an educator but still want to hear what you can do to engage with your child's school, or if you're just homeschooling and you need better ways to engage with your teen that's giving you a hard time. This will be a great session to sit in on this one here. And I know too, for you, Brittney, as an educator, dealing with parents may not be the best sometimes. So getting some those tools and tips for teachers as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And, you know, one thing we really wanted to make sure throughout this whole summit is that we were actually giving lots of actionable steps, actionable things that you could take away from these, you know, sessions and actively practice out in your day-to-day practice, whether that's parenting, whether that's, you know, being a teacher, like what can you actually take from this and what can you actually use? So really turning that theory into practice. You know, that was something that we really wanted to make sure that we were doing. And everything you said, it really just hit the nail on the head, like just between parenting and teaching, and how are we forging those authentic connections, and how are we, you know, it really does connect. Again, it connects into all of them are all interconnected. They're all woven together. Like you can take each session individually, or you can get all of them together. And they all kind of build upon each other, which is another big thing that we wanted to make sure that we did throughout this summit, is that it was very cohesive. And so thinking about how are we building cohesive connections? How are we building a school community? How are we working with parents? One thing, you know, I come from that early childhood background. I'm always thinking about that. And, you know, one of the most important things that I learned when I was going to school to teach was that you're always working with other people's children. At the end of the day, they're other people's children. And so they might do things that are different than the way that you would do things. They might say things differently. They might have different beliefs and practices than us. And it's really important that we kind of have the understanding and that we're building those connections and, you know, relationships with those parents, that, you know, we're able to give them feedback. They're able to give us feedback, and we're working together, because at the end of the day, our common goal is the education of this student, right? And our common goal is making sure that they're getting the best quality of education that they deserve and that they need, right? So that should be our common shared goal. And so we can do that through forging those good relationships with our family members, forging those relationships with our team, and really just making sure that we are, you know, being culturally responsive, that we're being respectful, that we're being kind, and that we're also, making sure everyone feels good in the space that we're coming into. Which
Absolutely.
again, like we said, everything kind of weaves into each other.
Yes.
But I also think that this really does weave into our next session,
Mhm. Yes. So,
which is on embracing leadership and avoiding burnout and setting boundaries.
yes. So our last session, exactly, and that's what's wrapping us up because as we know, so August 31st, again, embracing leadership and avoiding burnout and setting boundaries is really important. And this is big for our educators in the room, is really setting the tone on how do you set your own boundaries, but also embrace the importance of being a leader. You may not be the leader of your teaching group, or you may not be a principal or an administrator, but you are still a leader in your classroom. And so again, these are for all of your any leadership roles, but again, everybody does take ownership and leadership in this capacity, especially in the world of education. So on this session, we do have, again, two presenters that are working with us. So we have Andrea, who goes by Fitzgerald. She's a math educator coming from the East Coast, and she has this series out for rookie teachers. So these are for our newbie teachers, or our teachers that we call the freshmen. You'll see that too in the registration. If you're like 0 to 3 years, 4 or 5 years within, you're kind of newer to the game of education and teaching. And Andrea really gives us some really great insights of what it means to focus on self-efficacy and challenges and support that you may or may not have in your field of work and working with students. So she's going to be great for our newer teachers. And then we also have Robin Queen, who goes by Queen Educator, and she is the CEO and founder of Everybody Educate. And so she does focus in newborn to 12th grade special education and does specializing literacy, but she also does a lot of writing on avoiding burnout. She has journals available. She's an author, and she focuses on having creativity and art as well as part of your experience to kind of work on ways that you're able to kind of balance that work-life energy. So she's really going to speak to our older educators and those who may need that lift again of remembering, why did we get into this field? And I think too, for every educator that comes to listen on is remembering, why did you come into this work? And also being able to say no when it's appropriate, having accountability when you need to for that leadership capability, but as well as being able to work to, this is effective for working with those students, because we don't go into this profession realizing that inherently we become a therapist, we become a counselor, we become a parent or guardian in essence to these students, that it can be emotionally draining. And so having supports to recognize what those look like, and how do you turn off that switch from home life to school life, because a lot of us too, as educators and in the world, we have a lot to deal with on our own, in our own houses. Then we come to work, and then we're dealing with the classroom and the school environment and everybody else's issues that we have going on. I had did a presentation for my organization that I work with, and this sentiment of life is lifing. I love this statement. So I talk about this all the time, that we are all dealing with something on a day-to-day basis, hour-to-hour basis. And so just to kind of keep that in the back of our mind, that life is going to continue to go and continue to move on. So we have to really be proactive, not reactive. We have to be proactive in setting boundaries, so we can avoid that burnout, because this education system does not stop. We keep going. So really practicing self-care and well-being. And so I'm really excited for this one too, because that's going to be a very great tone setter for the next upcoming school year, to kind of lead us into that too, for those educators that are starting early. Here in Arizona, we start back in July. So it's, so we're coming to the end of our summer break here, but it's really important too for us to really take key in any field. But even as a parent, this will be effective for you too, because there's a lot of goals that and strategies here that will help us in any capacity. So I'm super excited with this one closing us out. But again, just thank you. I just want to personally thank you, Brittney, for collaborating with me and inviting me to do this with you. I think this is going to be a very powerful experience and discussion with anybody that joins. And so I'm just excited to start in the next 3 days.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, Kylie. I think this is going to be a really amazing, transformative experience for everyone who's able to join us. If you buy a ticket, you're not able to make the live session, you'll get the recording. So you'll have this access to this material for a while to come. And
Yeah.
I think it's just going to be a really amazing experience. Like I said, very transformative, very kind of looking forward, very uplifting, hence the name of the summit. There's going to be so much great information to learn. So I'm really excited to see everyone who's able to join us. If
Yes.
you look into our show notes below, you'll be able to see links to everything. So links to, look at the tickets and look at our amazing guest speakers. You can look at, the session details and everything that goes into that as well. And I can't wait to see you guys there. We're 3 days away. So don't forget to save your spot now.
Yes. Hashtag we're saying
Three
get
days
uplifted.
away.
or hashtag uplifted.
Get uplifted.
But
Hashtag.
yes, see, look how excited I got, guys. I ripped my headphone out my ear. But yes, so I'm really excited. And yes, thank you for putting this together with me. And we really hope to see you all there. I think too, the other thing to note is if there are other topics of conversations, please be sure to connect with Brittney and I through our social media so we can potentially think of something moving forward. But we're going to get through this first set and see how it goes. And I'm super excited again with that. And we hope to see you guys there.
We hope to see you there. Thank you again, Kylie. See you guys
Thank
there.
you.
3 days away.
Bye. 3 days.